But Jesus sees you differently because he sees somebody who's been elect and chosen and been bought with a price. Peter lived in the first century. He hung out with Jesus for 3 years. It changed his life dramatically. And as a result, he started these churches, and then he would write them letters. And we have a couple of those letters, which we've titled 1 Peter and 2 Peter, that are in our Bible, that kind of give what he's saying to these people. Now, here's what you need to know about these people. They were going through much more crazy times than we are today. They were dealing with horrific moments in their life. They were not just on the outside looking in of a society. They were persecuted for their faith. They were being killed for their faith. And Romans saw them as different. The Romans had many gods. The Christians had one God. The Romans viewed Caesar as the Son of God. The Christians viewed a homeless carpenter from Nazareth as the Son of God. When Rome got to a place where Nero decided, I want to rebuild it and do something in my honor, he burned half of it down, and then when they came and asked him what happened, he said, oh, the Christians did it. And so the persecution began. And we have a picture here of what's today referred to as Nero's garden. And this particular garden was used to entertain Nero's wild and crazy parties. And he would often bring out Christians and dip them in oil and put them on posts and light them on fire to light his garden parties. He would have them sewn into animal skins and thrown to wild dogs and lions to be eaten for everybody's pleasure. This was the different they were dealing with. And so in light of this remnant of people trying to keep their faith alive and trying to live in a culture that had just gone crazy, Peter writes this letter. And he says, I want to talk to you about what it means to be different. Now, some of you are here today and you're thinking, okay, that's really interesting, and I appreciate the history lesson, but what's that got to do with me? Well, the reality is you're living in a crazy world, and you've got crazy situations, and if you've ever felt like you were overwhelmed, not like you were on top of the world, but like the world was on top of you, then you are going to be able to resonate with this letter, because he writes to a group of people that was feeling that way, that felt like outcasts, that felt different, and he's going to tell them, it's okay, and I'm going to tell you why. So over these next 5 weeks, we're going to walk through this letter, and we're going to do that both in here. We're going to do that with a little something new we've created on our podcast, which is called Simple Faith. We call this the Monday Minute. So every Monday, you can take a listen to this, and it gives you a little extra from the weekend message we didn't have time to do. If you don't get the weekend message, you can also get it there or watch it on YouTube. But we're going to give you a little extra there, and then you can go to your Sunday studies or to your small groups and take it even further in your discussion there. And so today, we're going to start off by jumping right into this first letter of Peter that he writes to this church that's feeling like they're on the outside looking in, and they feel different. And he's going to tell them, that is okay. It is okay. And so what we're going to do is we're going to jump into this passage, and I'm going to just read the first 3 verses, and we're going to dive deep into it. So we're not getting very far, but we're going pretty deep. So 1 Peter chapter 1, let's jump right into this and see what Peter has to say for us. He starts off this way. Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ, to God's elect, exiles scattered throughout the provinces of Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia, who've been chosen according to the foreknowledge of God the Father, through the sanctifying work of the Spirit, to be obedient to Jesus Christ and sprinkled with his blood. Grace and peace be yours in abundance. Now, let's just start right at the beginning. He starts off with his name, Peter. Now, you might be wondering, why would he start off a letter with the name and not put it at the very end? Here's why. Because when they got letters, they were scrolls. And if you wanted to know who it was from and you wrote it at the very end, they had to roll the whole thing out to read Peter XOXO, right? But instead, he puts it right at the beginning. This is who it is. It's coming from Peter. And they would know him as being an apostle of Jesus. Now, back in those days, this was critical for them to know that they were reading from somebody who was an eyewitness to what Jesus did. Now, Peter himself was just a bundle of contradictions. This was a guy that was the first to announce that Jesus was the Messiah, and also the first to deny him publicly. This was a guy that Jesus said, you're the rock on which I'll build my church. And then Jesus said, get behind me, Satan. You think you've had a bad day? It's not a bad day till Jesus says, yeah, you're Satan. Okay, so that's a bad day. Peter lived that. And Peter wrote this letter probably in around 65 AD, about 30 years after Jesus had walked the earth and was crucified and resurrected. And Peter is writing this to a group of Christians to encourage them and to bring life to them because they were feeling like they were overwhelmed. And they had been persecuted and their friends were dying. And Peter himself was so outspoken that he eventually gets arrested. And when they say, "We're going to crucify you," he said, "Bring it on, but I'm not worthy to be crucified like my Lord. Crucify me upside down." That's Peter. And he writes this letter to this church. And then he says that he is an apostle of Jesus Christ, which lets us know that he is somebody that has been sent out by God. Now, here's what you need to know and I need to know. Being sent out by God is not just for the apostles. It's not just for those that were eyewitnesses to Jesus. It's anybody who, in the words of that song, bear his name. Any of us who claim to be followers of Jesus are now messengers of Jesus and his words. We are to be sent out. When you received Jesus and you were baptized, it did not mean now you get to show up at church on a weekend, sit and soak, and go home and ride it out until Jesus returns. No. This is like base camp where we come together and then we go out and we put it into practice and we live it out. And people should look at us and see, you're like Jesus. The way that you love people, the way that you're kind to people, the way that you greet people with a smile, and the way that you wave at people in traffic with all of your fingers. You know, that is a Jesus kind of thing, right? Way to go. And they see that in our lives. We're being sent out just like Jesus and just like Peter, and as he talks about here. Okay, so let's talk about who he's sending this letter to. He says, this is to God's elect, exiles scattered throughout the provinces of Pontus and Galatia and Cappadocia, Asia and Bithynia. I don't know about you, but sometimes when I read these terms, I think, are those real places? Is this just, kind of like, titles from Star Wars or something like, where are these places? Well, this is modern day Turkey. This is where this is taking place. And these people are going through the worst of the worst. And these people are struggling and they're being thrown to lions and they're being arrested and they're losing their livelihood. We worry about how we're going to vote. They didn't have a vote. We worry about our government. Their government was crucifying them, killing them. And Peter writes this letter to these people, and he starts off this letter. He starts off this letter by talking about their identity. I mean, it's just fitting that he starts there. He uses words like to God's elect and have been chosen. Can we just park there for just a second? These words always confuse people. What's this mean? Does this mean that there's some people who are elected and those who are not? Does it mean there's some people who are chosen and those who are not? And there's big words associated with this, like predestination and Calvinism and free will and Arminianism and all of that. Can I just tell you, if I could sum it all up, I recognize there's good views on each side of this argument, but the reality is everybody who gets to heaven is there because they chose Jesus, and everybody who chose Jesus, Jesus has been working on them. That's how those two things come together. And these are the people that Peter is talking to, and he says, so one person loved that. Okay, see, thank you, man. It's a sleepy crowd today, all right? But the Cowboys won. Celebrate that. Okay. Anyway, these are the people that Peter is talking to, and here's Peter's point. This is what he's trying to say. You, elect, chosen, however you want to define those, you are special. You have been chosen by God for great things. You have been set apart, set aside to do great things for God. Some of you right now are thinking, that's not me. You know what I do? You know what I've done? You know the argument my wife and I had on the way here today? You know how I dropped my kids off in children's ministry and I may not go get them? I get it. We've all been there. But Jesus sees you differently. The Father sees you differently because he sees somebody who's been elect and chosen and been bought with a price. And Peter says, I want you to know your identity.